Hello and welcome to our tutorial. We're just going to do a little bit of work in Adobe After Effects, and I'm just going to try and make a 2D image a bit more interesting and make it sort of three-dimensional. So I'm going to click on New Composition. I'm going to start a new composition, so make sure my frame rate's at 25. I'm 1920 by 1080, and I've set my timeline here to 10 seconds. So normally in Premiere your timeline is infinite, so you can have it as long as you want. But and I think this one defaults to 30 normally, so you type in how long you want it. So this will be 10 seconds. We don't need it to be any longer than that. And we'll call this I don't know, 2D to 3D, and we'll hit OK. So here's my composition. So this is where images go. This is where media, pictures and video comes in here, and this is my timeline. And then this is sort of properties, or kind of like an inspector window over here. So let's import a picture. So I'm going to import a file from my desktop. I'm going to import this car picture here. And then I'm going to literally drag and drop it onto the timeline. The picture is 4000 by 3000. I don't know, it's 4000 by 2600. So it's much bigger than the composition, than the output. So I can rescale this. So I'm literally just holding it by like with the left mouse button. But you can see here I've got I can do all sorts of weird things to it. So I'm going to open up the car here on the timeline, and it's transform, and I'm going to go to its scale, and I want to lock its scale so they're all the same. So I'm going to type in 100, and then the same here, 100. Oh, I need to unlock it and then bring it back. So now they're both at 100. I'm going to lock them so that it stays, the aspect ratio stays correct. And I'm just going to use this to slide down to make sure it's the right size. And I'm going to lift this up a little bit. Now the technique that we're going to use here, we're going to look at making a mask and cutting out the car, so that we can kind of zoom, make it make it look like it's a bit more three-dimensional. So I'm going to right click here and go mask, and I'm going to go new mask, and the masks are here. So this is my mask here, and this is its shape, and you can see its shape here. This is it here. So I can take this mask and I can grab the corner of it, and I can double click on it, and I can edit it. So I can bring this into here and bring this into here. So that's my mask. I'm just going to hit enter here. So now I'm going to take this car and I'm going to duplicate it. Actually I can just go Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V. So now I have two of them. On this one underneath, I'm going to delete the mask. I don't want that mask, so I can just press the delete key. And now I can turn off the layer, and we can see the one on top. So this layer here has a mask, and this layer here is, it's the same image in the same place at the same scale, but it has the background. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm not interested in that at the moment. I am interested in this one, and I want to go back to my mask. And I want to edit that mask. I want to edit its shape. So I can go up here and I can click on the add in a vertex, and it's a roto Bezier, which means that it'll be curved. So I can take this here and I can make a mask that's a bit more I was holding down the middle mouse wheel to zoom there. So I can add in these curves and make them kind of adhere or follow the car a little bit better. Let's move you up a little bit. And you can really get quite accurate with these if you want. I'm not going to make this too perfect here. It's more just to illustrate what you can do and what's possible. Okay. And what we're going to try and do is make it look like we have an animated camera. And if that makes no sense, then hopefully it will in a moment. So kind of just adding these points in. You can see I'm grabbing what are called the handles on the Roto Bezier. And when you use those handles, you can curve the line. So like I said, you can get really, oops, Control Z, get really good control. Okay, all right, I need to double click. Oh, I've come off my tool, that's the problem. Okay. And oh yeah, I'll try and, so if I had more time I would make this much better, but this will do for now. Okay, so only a couple more to do. And nearly there. That needs to rotate the other way. And then we can get away with not having this too perfect here because it's going into darkness. We'll just do that. Okay, so what we have there is a simple mask around our car. Now, I can turn back on the background and, you know, it looks like very little has changed. So we can do some really nice things now once we've cut out that car. So once we have it cut out with the mask, and like I said, it's not perfect. You can see my windscreen's a bit cut here. I can go in and fix that, and I've got some extra material here around the wheels, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a camera. So I'm going to say new camera. And when I do that, it's going to ask me what sort of camera do I want. And I'm just going to leave it at its default settings. But you can see here, you can put in you know, how much the camera can zoom, its focal length, all sorts of really interesting things. You can enable depth of field, and we'll kind of be faking depth of field in a minute, and you'll see how we'll do that. But you can actually have it calculate depth of field based on distance. So I'm going to hit OK, and so it's working stuff out there, I think. So I should see a camera appear down on my timeline. It's giving me a pop-up. It says, warning, camera and lights do not affect 2D layers. Select a layer and choose Layer 3D from the menu. Okay, and I go OK. So so we can go up to menus and do that, but it has built into it here. So this little icon here says 3D layer. So I can click on here and click on here with these two icons. And now all the layers are three-dimensional. And I know they're three-dimensional because when I open it up and I look at its transform, so its position, instead of just having an X and Y position, I now have a new Z position, which is basically how close it is to the camera. So this says here active camera. So we can actually change how we're looking at this here. We can look from the top. So this is what the camera sees. So this little white line, I don't know if you can see it, is actually the kind of the plane where the 2D images are sitting. So if I take my car here it's got X, Y, and Z. So if I change, oh, sorry, X, Y, Z, its position on Z, hopefully you can see it moving backward, or away from the camera or towards the camera. So if we look back through the camera and see what that looks like when we're looking through the camera, it's coming towards us or moving away from us. So let's just turn back on the background. And what we've got here is, and this is kind of neat, so when I go backwards, I now can't see it. I'm seeing the background. Now I can see, and it looks like the car is slightly bigger. And that's because it is bigger, it's physically closer to us. So if I go back to looking from the top, so this here is coming towards us and getting bigger. And you can see this line here is the camera's angle of view. And we could bring it all the way towards us and make it very big, but it ultimately would pixelate. Now this is a good image to use because the resolution is much higher than the 1920 by 1080 resolution that we're going to output at. So even if I pull it quite close, it won't pixelate too much, and that's sort of important that you have that in mind when you're doing this exercise, that you use the correct picture, otherwise you'll get bad results. So we don't have much more to do with this, except that we want to animate the camera. So we're going to select the camera. Again, we're going to go from on top. And this is the camera's starting position. So we're going to say we're going to close up the car layers, going to open up the camera and go to its transform. And these little stopwatches here, these little icons, are keyframes to turn on and off keyframes, exactly the same way as you would have in Adobe Premiere. So I'm going to turn on the position keyframe. So I'm on frame number 1. And then I'm going to push forward in time all the way to 10 seconds. And then I'm going to push forward on the camera. So the camera is moving in. So that's interesting. But I'd like to rotate it as well. So I'm going to go back a little bit here. And I'm going to take the rotation of the camera. So again, we have to think of X, Y, and Z. So let's just play with this, see what this does. So this rotates me on my X-axis. So that's the red one here. So I don't want to do that. That's sort of basically tilting up and down. The Y-axis is left and right, because the Y-axis is straight up, is the vertical axis. So that's sort of the one I want to rotate on. So I want to remember my starting position here. And then at the end, I want to rotate a little bit. So I'm kind of looking around the car. Now, you can see here that I've gone off to the side. So I'm seeing black now. So let's just go back in and see what the camera can see. So you can see I've got a slither of black here along the side. So let's fix that. And how I fix that is I take these two images here and I'm going to make them bigger. I'm going to scale them up. Now I could hold the shift key and that will keep the aspect ratio in the correct position, or like it'll keep the two of them lined up. So now what we should get is a bit of parallax. We should be able to see, so maybe we'll try and turn around the corner a little bit more. So we'll go back to our camera here, and we'll go back to the top, and let's see the animation here. So we're moving forward and we're ending here. So let's see if we can move a little more forward. So go to there. Okay, and now let's have a look at what the camera can see. So okay, and what we're trying to get is a sense of kind of parallax of, see this tree here, that it's, you know, it's sort of over this pillar of the windscreen, and by the end it's moved a little bit. So let's just try and make that look a little bit more profound, that movement, so we get a bit more parallax. So again, I'm going to take, this is the background now I'm working on, so I'm going to keyframe its position at the beginning, and then by the end I'm going to see if I can just slip it a little bit, so it's already moving slightly to the right, it's moving on the x-axis. So I'm going to go to its position, so the first one is x. I'm going to see if I, now if I go too far I reveal the car underneath, so I can only go to there. But that movement makes it seem a bit more three-dimensional. Okay, and then finally what we're going to do is we're going to try and fake sort of a depth of field. There's already sort of a depth of field in the image. But what we're going to do is we're going to take an effect. So we'll select the background and we'll right click and go effects, and we'll go to blur, and we'll take maybe a simple blur, a Gaussian blur. And at the moment it's set to 0. Now we can also access this information down here on its layer, which is my preference. So I was going to make this go up a little bit. So I'm going to close the transform and open the effects, and we've got Gaussian blur here. So I'm going to go back to frame 1, and I'm going to keyframe the blur, and then I'm going to move in and go all the way back to 10 seconds, slide along my timeline, and then increase the blur. Now, so as we've traveled in towards the car stays in focus because the car was always in focus, and you can see the background, while it starts out of focus, it becomes more blurred and we focus more on the car. Now I could probably do that a little less and make it a bit more subtle, but this is just to illustrate what's possible. Okay, so after we've set that up and we're kind of finished now, just wanted to show you that technique. And you can see here I've got a duplicate car wheel here, so this is far from a perfect example, but you get the idea. You could always go, if I'm doing this myself, I use it a lot in documentaries. Like you might have file footage or an old photograph for a documentary, and that's all you have to sustain an image, maybe a photograph of a grandparent or something, and you've got 10 or 15 seconds of voiceover to go with just a still image. And so using this can, you know, cutting out a person or a building, and then sort of having the camera slowly drift around it just a little bit can make it visually more interesting, and you can sustain the still on screen for a lot longer. So if you want to export from Adobe After Effects, there's a number of ways to go about it, but basically you've got a timeline here, and when you're finished you want to render. So you're going to go to the composition window, and you're going to go to add to render queue, and then you get this window will pop up here, and these are basically the output settings. So we haven't specified where we want to save it to, so we'll say our desktop, and we'll leave it 2D to 3D. At the moment it's an AVI, we'll sort that out in a minute. Then we're going to go to our settings here, and we're going to say full quality, and the full, like we could crop it and only export a small amount if we wanted. And then we go to lossless, which is where we put in the compressor and the wrapper. So we'll say we want a QuickTime movie, and we will use, I'll go to format options here, and these are all the codecs that are available to me, and none of them are terribly good, but I'll use just ProRes 422 Lite, which is small, and go OK. So this is my my codec and my wrapper set up. I'll go OK, and then when we're happy that we have the settings correct, I can just hit render over here, and then this is it rendering out the effect. Now it's quite a RAM intensive piece of software, so down here it says RAM at 73%, so I have 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM on this computer, which is quite a lot. It's quite fast, the RAM. So this might be quite slow if you're using a laptop or some other machine. So Adobe After Effects, while it's a really excellent piece of software and quite stable, and it does an enormous amount of interesting effects, it's also quite hungry for RAM. So I'm going to minimize that and minimize my Adobe Cloud. And let me see if I can find this. There we go. There's my video here. So I double click on it and it has opened on my other monitor. And it can't play in that piece of software. Fantastic. So let's see if I can open it and say VLC player. Open with VLC player. So my machine is slowing down because I've got a whole bunch of things going on simultaneously. Any moment now. And there we go. So again, it's just if you had a shot and you wanted to sustain the shot a little bit longer on screen for, say, a documentary, or even for your lighting reel, although you shouldn't be mucking around too much with the shots in your lighting reel. But you can see it adds it makes the shot just a little bit more interesting. Okay, we'll leave it there for now.